My name is Gabriella White. Several years ago, I met Wally through a friend at university. At the time, I belonged to the university hiking club, and Wally was also a member. As we walked together through mountains and forests, our hearts opened up to each other alongside nature's beauty. One day, during a long hike, we came upon a beautiful lake. While spreading out our lunch by the lakeside, Wally suddenly turned to me and said, "Gabriella, the time I spend with you is so special. I want to be with you forever." I was filled with surprise and joy, and that moment marked the beginning of our relationship. Years later, we married and built a happy home together. Wally was a hard-working engineer, and I worked at the local library. We supported each other, loved each other, and shared life's small joys. However, I had recently begun to feel uneasy about Wally's behavior. He was spending less time at home and increasingly staying out late, citing work stress as the reason. Then our daughter, Ivy, was born. She was our long-awaited first child, and her birth brought new joy to our lives. After giving birth, I lay in my hospital bed holding Ivy, feeling both exhausted and relieved. Suddenly, Wally entered the hospital room. There was an unfamiliar stern expression on his face. When he saw Ivy, he suddenly began shouting, "That child isn't mine. I don't want her." I froze at his words. I stared at Wally in disbelief, unable to understand why he would say such cruel things. Wally had previously suspected me of having an affair, and those suspicions must have grown in his mind. However, Ivy was undoubtedly our daughter. His words deeply wounded my heart. At that moment, Nurse Veronica approached me. Her expression showed both tension and determination. "Gabriella, that child is special. You need to run away right now." Though confused by her words, I felt terrified by Wally's abnormal behavior, so I held Ivy close and left the room. As I walked down the hospital hallway, Wally's words kept echoing in my head, and my heart was pounding. I held Ivy tightly. Nurse Veronica, who had been chasing after me while I was still trying to understand what was happening, caught up. She was usually someone who comforted me with her kind smile, but now her face was filled with tension and urgency. "Gabriella." Her voice was desperate. "Veronica, why would Wally say such things?" I asked, my voice nearly breaking. Veronica grabbed my shoulders firmly and said with a serious expression, "Gabriella, listen. Your baby, Ivy, is special. I can't explain everything right now, but she's extremely important." "What do you mean by special?" I listened to Veronica's words, though confused. "There's no time. Seeing Wally's behavior, I'm certain. He's planning something terrible." Veronica's eyes were filled with fear. "Gabriella, you need to take Ivy and run away from here. Get in my car." I held Ivy tightly and followed Veronica's instructions. Her urgent voice and Wally's shouts were swirling in my head, and my heart was in turmoil. But protecting Ivy was now my top priority. Following Veronica, I hurried toward the hospital exit. Other patients and nurses in the hallway watched us with puzzled expressions. When Veronica pushed open the hospital door, cold wind enveloped us. We rushed to Veronica's car parked in the lot, and she quickly started the engine and drove off. From the back seat, holding Ivy, I looked at Veronica's back and said, "Thank you, Veronica." Veronica looked at me through the rearview mirror and smiled. "Don't mention it, Gabriella. I just want to protect you and Ivy." Veronica's car entered a quiet residential area. She carefully parked the car and turned to me, saying, "Let's settle down here for a moment. We need time to assess the situation before going back to your house." Holding Ivy tightly, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. "Thank you, Veronica. You're really helping me." Veronica smiled gently. "There might be important clues at your house. When you're ready, let's go back." For a while, I gazed at Ivy's tiny face. She was sleeping peacefully, and her presence gave me a small measure of comfort. "We need to go back home to protect Ivy." When I said this, Veronica nodded and started the car again. A few minutes later, we arrived at my house. From the outside, everything seemed normal. I thanked Veronica and got out of the car, carrying Ivy into the house. The house was cool inside, with a heavy silence hanging in the air. I laid Ivy down on the living room sofa and looked around. While checking for anything unusual, Wally's words and Veronica's warning kept swirling in my mind. I headed to Wally's study. He spent a lot of time in this room, and there might be some clues here. Entering the study, I found several books and documents scattered on the desk. I carefully opened the drawers, checking each one. That's when I noticed a diary. I picked it up and began turning the pages. The first page read, "Wally's diary." I held my breath as I read on. The diary contained entries about Wally suspecting me of having an affair and his conviction that Ivy wasn't his child. Furthermore, there were notes about Ivy being born with a rare condition, and Wally's plans to profit from using this data after realizing its research value. My hands were shaking, and anger and sadness welled up in my chest. Wally didn't acknowledge Ivy as his child and saw her merely as a means to make money. Just then, I heard the front door open. Wally had come home. I quickly closed the diary and returned to the living room, but Wally seemed to notice my actions. He stared at me coldly and asked, "Did you go into my room?" Since he had noticed, there was no point in hiding it. I decided to confront him with the truth right there to protect Ivy. "I read your diary, Wally," I answered firmly. "Why would you plan something like that? Ivy is our daughter." Wally sighed and sat down on the sofa. "Gabriella, you might not understand, but this is for the future." "For the future?" "You were planning to use Ivy, weren't you? How could you do something like that?" My voice rose. Wally answered calmly, "Ivy's condition is extremely rare. It has high research value and could bring enormous profits. This is business." His words filled me with anger. "Ivy isn't a business tool. She's our precious daughter. How can you think of something so cruel?" Wally stared at me expressionlessly. "By utilizing Ivy's condition, my life will completely change. She's a special existence. That doesn't make it right to use her. She's not your experimental subject. I shouted, holding back tears. I'll fight you to protect Ivy, no matter what. Wally laughed coldly and stood up. Whatever you do is useless. You can't stop this plan. I realized how cold and selfish Wally had become. He was no longer the Wally I once knew. I had to fight to protect Ivy. I shouted, I'll do anything to protect Ivy. I will absolutely stop your plan. Wally returned to his cold expression and said in a calm voice, Is that so? Then there's no helping it. Everything would be solved if you just handed over Ivy, but is that what you want? I will never hand Ivy over to you. I strongly refused. She's my daughter and needs to be protected. A heavy tension hung in the living room air. Wally stared at me silently for a while, then let out a deep sigh. His expression showed a sharp determination, as if he had made up his mind about something. Gabriella, you seem to need more explanation, he said quietly. I listened to his words with caution. Wally looked away from me and began speaking while staring out the window. I don't believe Ivy is my child. You remember how I suspected you of having an affair in the past. I just couldn't shake that suspicion. I felt my chest tighten with surprise and sadness. Wally, that was just suspicion. I never had an affair. But I have no way to believe that, Wally continued. When I learned that Ivy was born with a rare condition, those suspicions grew stronger. If she were my child, she wouldn't have such a condition. Surely her father isn't me. Is that why you decided to use Ivy? I had lost the energy to deny his accusations. Wally nodded. That's right. When I realized Ivy's condition had research value, I made plans to gain financial benefit from it. I thought this was the best way to secure my future. Unable to contain my anger, I raised my voice. I don't want any future that comes from exploiting Ivy. Wally sneered and said, Ivy is a tool with value. Her condition is extremely rare and will provide valuable data for researchers. By using her condition, I might be able to secure a wonderful future. You might not understand, but this is business. I don't want to hear this. I shouted through tears. This is absolutely unforgivable. I said nothing more. Then I picked up Ivy and turned toward the front door. Where do you think you're going? Wally asked coldly. I'm taking Ivy somewhere safe, I answered without looking back. To escape from you. Wally said nothing. I opened the front door while holding Ivy. The darkness of night enveloped us, heightening the tension of our escape. The moment I stepped outside, I remembered Veronica's words, Gabriella, that child is special. Those words pushed me forward as I hurried to get into the car. As I started the engine and drove off, I thought about where to go to protect Ivy. I decided to head to Veronica's house first. Surely she would help us. As I drove, Wally's car appeared behind me. He was following us. My heart pounded, and my palms grew sweaty. I had to escape at all costs to protect Ivy. I increased my speed and drove along winding roads. Wally's car persistently followed. My heart was filled with fear and tension. I could see Veronica's house. I parked in front of it and quickly knocked on the door while holding Ivy. The door opened, and Veronica welcomed us with a surprised look. "Gabriella, what happened?" Veronica asked worriedly. "Wally is following us," I answered, breathless. "Please help us, Veronica." Veronica immediately understood the situation and invited us inside, firmly closing the door. "Don't worry, you're safe here," Veronica said gently, placing her hand on my shoulder. "I've called the police." Through tears, I expressed my gratitude to Veronica. "Thank you, Veronica. Thank you so much." "It's all right, Gabriella," Veronica said with a smile. Just then, we heard Wally shouting from outside. He was banging on the door, yelling, "Hand over Ivy." Though my heart was filled with fear, Veronica's words gave me courage. "Gabriella, love always wins. We'll fight to protect Ivy," Veronica said firmly. Inside Veronica's house was quiet, providing a stark contrast to the tense situation outside. While Ivy slept peacefully in my arms, my heart was full of anxiety and tension. "Gabriella, first, let's stay calm. We need to think calmly about protecting Ivy," Veronica said in a gentle voice. "Thank you, Veronica. But Wally isn't someone who gives up easily. He'll do anything to get Ivy," I answered with a trembling voice. Veronica nodded. "Let's wait here until the police arrive. As long as we're together here, Ivy is safe." Those words brought me a little relief, but knowing how persistent Wally could be, I couldn't completely relax. Veronica prepared drinks for us and encouraged me to stay calm. "Can you tell me more about Wally's plans?" Veronica asked. I nodded and began explaining in detail what I had found in Wally's diary. I told her about his plans to profit from Ivy's condition and his intention to provide her as research material to scientists. Veronica listened with a serious expression. "That's truly horrifying," Veronica sighed. "But once the police arrive, we can expose Wally's plans." Just then, we heard sirens outside. The police had arrived. Veronica opened the front door and began explaining the situation to the officers. I waited in the living room, holding Ivy. A few minutes later, one of the police officers entered the living room and gently addressed me. "Mrs. White. We're here to protect you. Could you tell us more about your husband's plans?" I told the officer about Wally's diary and its contents, sharing everything necessary to protect Ivy. The officers listened seriously and began taking the necessary steps. "Understood. Don't worry. We'll do everything we can to stop his plans," the officer said reassuringly. Veronica sat next to me, placing her hand on my shoulder to encourage me. "Gabriella, it's going to be all right now. The police are handling it, just hang in there a little longer." Veronica prepared warm blankets for us and spoke kindly to comfort me. "Gabriella, you're a strong mother. You're doing everything you can to protect Ivy. Your courage is unmatched." Veronica said with a smile. Her words brought tears to my eyes. Holding Ivy, I felt grateful for Veronica's support. My determination to protect Ivy at all costs grew even stronger. Several hours after the police arrived at Veronica's house, my heart wavered between anxiety and hope. Veronica continued to support us. As the clock in the living room seemed to move slowly, I held Ivy tightly. Suddenly, we heard an urgent voice from the police radio. Target secured. Repeat, target secured. I breathed a sigh of relief at those words. Wally had been arrested. One of the police officers entered the living room and smiled at me. Mrs. White, we've arrested your husband. You and Ivy are safe now. I exhaled with relief at those words. Veronica sat next to me, placing her hand on my shoulder to encourage me. That's wonderful, Gabriella. You can relax now. The police officers explained the details of Wally's arrest and told me how he would be handled going forward. Your husband will be charged with attempting to profit from your daughter's condition. The domestic threats will also be taken very seriously. Holding Ivy tightly, I felt relieved that Wally would face legal consequences. Thank you so much for protecting Ivy. The officer nodded and replied, It's our job. Your safety is what matters most. Veronica squeezed my hand and said, Gabriella, now you can really make a fresh start. Let's live strongly for Ivy. Just then, the front door opened, and Wally was brought in handcuffed. His face showed no remorse, only cold eyes staring at us. As the police officer pushed him into the patrol car, Wally spoke his final words. Gabriella, this isn't over. I won't give up. Remember that. Though I felt a moment of fear at his words, Veronica's words quickly came to mind. Gabriella, you're a strong mother. You're doing everything you can to protect Ivy. Your courage is unmatched. As I listened to the patrol car drive away, I renewed my determination to protect Ivy. I was determined to give everything I had to start a new life with Ivy, without yielding to Wally's threats. Veronica smiled beside me and said, Now you can really relax. You and Ivy are safe. In the quiet living room of Veronica's house, I held new hope with Ivy. With Wally's arrest, our future became bright again. Grateful for Veronica's support and the police's quick response, I held on to my determination to live strongly for Ivy's sake. Several weeks after Wally's arrest, our lives were gradually regaining stability. Veronica continued to support us devotedly. We moved to a safe location and decided to prioritize Ivy's health and happiness in our new life. Our new house was in a quiet suburb with a spacious yard where Ivy could play freely. Veronica visited us frequently and supported our life. Her presence was more comforting than words could express. One day, I was playing with Ivy in the garden. Every time I saw her smile, I felt that all our hardships had been worthwhile. Though Ivy was still small, her eyes sparkled with hope for the future. Ivy, look. The flowers are blooming, I said to her with a smile. Ivy clapped her tiny hands in delight. Her innocent smile warmed my heart. In the evening, Veronica came to visit. She brought dinner for us, and we gathered around the table together. Her presence brought comfort to our lives, and our bond grew stronger with each passing day. "Gabriella, I'm so proud of how strong you've been for Ivy," Veronica said with a smile. "Thank you, Veronica. But I couldn't have made it this far without your support." "It's all thanks to you," I replied gratefully. After dinner, I took Ivy to bed to tuck her in. She fell asleep quickly, and as I watched her peaceful sleeping face, I felt hope for the future. While having tea with Veronica in the living room, we discussed our plans going forward. We vowed to work together to build a stable life and bright future for Ivy. We should gather more information about Ivy's condition and think about how to manage it, Veronica said with a serious expression. "Yes, we'll do everything we can, making Ivy's health our top priority," I answered with renewed determination. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on the difficult days we'd been through, but at the same time, my heart was filled with new hope. I felt grateful that we had been freed from Wally's threats and could start a new life with Ivy. Our lives continued to move forward, little by little. As Ivy grew, the bond between Veronica and me grew stronger, and our friendship deepened. Research into Ivy's condition progressed, and measures were put in place to protect her health. I vowed to live strongly for Ivy's sake. Love always wins. I believed that light would surely shine on the future we would walk together with Ivy.